The stage lights illuminated Ace. From the shadows of the venue, a voice rose and spoke a single name. Ace released his guitar. Silence fell. Madison Square Garden. 1987. 15,000 people. The kind of crowd that fills every crack of space with noise, anticipation, heat. Ace Frehley stood center stage under a white spotlight, his Gibson Les Paul hanging from his shoulders, fingers moving across the fretboard with that distinctive precision. Not flashy, not desperate for attention, just exact. He was midway through a solo. One of those solos that doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand you watch. It just plays. Clean. Controlled. The kind of guitar work that makes other musicians stop talking backstage and listen. The crowd was locked in. That rare moment in a concert when 15,000 individual people become one organism, breathing together, moving together, waiting together for the next note. And then someone shouted from the darkness. Not a scream. Not the usual concert chaos. A single voice, clear and deliberate, cutting through the music like a blade through silk. One name. 2 syllables. Vincent. Ace's hand stopped. Not a gradual slowdown. Not a musical resolution. His fingers simply ceased moving. The solo died mid-phrase, the last note hanging in the air like a question no one knew how to answer. He lowered his right hand from the guitar neck. His left hand released the strings. The instrument hung from its strap, suddenly just weighed against his body instead of an extension of his voice. 15,000 people fell silent. Not because they chose to. Because something in Ace's stillness commanded it. The spotlight stayed on him. His face, usually hidden behind the performance, behind the focus required to play, was completely exposed. Shock. Disbelief. The expression of a man hearing something impossible. He didn't speak. He never did. He just stood there, alone in the light, staring into the darkness where that voice had come from. Ace didn't defend himself. He never did. To understand what happened in that moment, you need to understand what happened in 1974. Ace Frehley wasn't always Ace Frehley, legendary guitarist, Space Ace, the man behind the silver makeup and the smoking guitar. In 1974, he was Paul Frehley, a guitarist from the Bronx who just joined a band called Kiss. They were nobody. Playing small clubs. Building something. Trying to figure out who they were. The makeup came early. The personas. The characters. Gene Simmons became the demon. Paul Stanley became the Stardust. Peter Criss became the cat. And Paul Frehley became the spaceman, Ace. It was supposed to be just a gimmick. A way to stand out. A visual hook to match the music. But something happened. The character started to eclipse the man. People saw the makeup, the silver suit, the smoking guitar effects. They saw the spectacle. They didn't see Paul Frehley from the Bronx who'd spent 10 years learning to play, who practiced until his fingers bled, who understood music theory better than half the session musicians in New York. They saw a showman. And in 1974, at a recording session for Kiss's second album, a studio producer made that very clear. The band was laying down tracks at Electric Lady Studios in Greenwich Village. Ace was working on the solo for a song called Parasite. He'd written it out, practiced it, knew exactly what he wanted to play. The producer, a man named Martin Whitfield, hired by the label, not chosen by the band, sat in the control room watching through the glass. Ace couldn't hear him, but he could see him. Whitfield was talking to his assistant, gesturing at Ace, laughing. After the take, Whitfield's voice came through the talkback speaker. That was fine, space guy. Real fun. But let's get Vincent in here for the actual recording. Ace looked up. What? Vincent Torres. Session guitarist. We had him on standby. He'll track the solo. You focus on the live shows, that's where the costume works anyway. The other band members were in the control room. Gene looked furious. Paul Stanley was already standing up, ready to fight. But Ace just stood there in the recording booth, guitar in hand, staring at the producer through the glass. "I wrote that solo," Ace said quietly. "I'm sure you did. But we need it clean. Professional. This is a record, not a stage show." Ace didn't argue. He didn't yell. He didn't explain that he'd been playing guitar since he was 13, that he'd studied jazz and blues, that he understood music in ways that had nothing to do with makeup or costumes. He just unplugged his guitar, left the booth, and walked out of the studio. Vincent Torres recorded the solo. It made it onto the album. Ace's name was still in the credits, but the guitar work wasn't his. And for the next 13 years, Ace carried that moment with him. Not as a grudge. Not as bitterness. Just as knowledge. The knowledge that people would always see the costume before they saw the guitarist. He didn't need to prove anything. He just needed to play. Away from the spotlight, Ace made a choice no one expected. Madison Square Garden. 1987. Ace stood frozen under the spotlight, the name, Vincent, still echoing in his mind. The crowd was murmuring now, confused, uncertain. Roadies were glancing at each other backstage. The sound engineer was frantically checking if there was a technical problem. But Ace wasn't looking at any of them. His eyes had adjusted to the darkness beyond the stage lights. He was scanning the crowd, looking for the source of that voice. And then he saw him. Row M, Section 117. An older man, maybe 60, standing among seated fans. Thin. Gray hair. Wearing a worn denim jacket. Vincent Torres. Ace recognized him immediately, even though it had been 13 years. The same narrow face. The same way of standing, slightly hunched, hands in pockets, like he was perpetually uncomfortable being noticed. Their eyes met across the darkness and distance. 15,000 people between them, and somehow it felt like a private conversation. Vincent raised one hand. Not a wave. Just acknowledgement. "I'm here." Ace looked down at his guitar. Then back at Vincent. Then at the crowd, still silent, still waiting for something to happen. He could continue the song. Finish the solo. Pretend he hadn't heard. Move on. That would be the professional thing to do. The show must go on. But Ace had spent 13 years being professional. 13 years playing while people assumed the makeup did the work. 13 years being underestimated. He made a choice. Ace walked to the microphone at center stage. He never used the mic during instrumentals. His guitar was his voice. But now he leaned toward it, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet. Conversational. Like he was talking to one person instead of 15,000. "There's someone here tonight," Ace said, "who I haven't seen in a long time." The crowd went completely still. 13 years ago, a producer told me I wasn't good enough to record my own solo. Said I was just a costume. Just a showman. He brought in a session guitarist named Vincent Torres to play what I'd written. Murmurs rippled through the audience. People were looking around, trying to understand what was happening. "Vincent played it perfectly," Ace continued. "Exactly as written. Professional. Clean. Everything the producer wanted." He paused, adjusting his guitar strap. "Vincent's here tonight." In the crowd. A spotlight operator, following instinct, swung a small spot towards Section 117. It found Vincent Torres, standing among the seated crowd, now visibly uncomfortable with the attention. Ace looked directly at him. "I never thanked you," Ace said. "For playing my solo when I walked out. For making it sound the way I heard it in my head. For being a professional when I was too angry to stay." Vincent didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there in the secondary spotlight, an old session musician who'd played on 1,000 tracks and been forgotten by history, now pinned under attention he never sought. "But there's something I need you to hear," Ace said. "The solo you played in 1974. The one the producer wanted instead of mine." He turned back to his guitar. "This is what I would have played if he'd let me stay." Subscribe and leave a comment. because some moments only make sense when we remember them together. Ace didn't count off. Didn't signal the band. Just started playing. The first notes were the same as the recorded version. The opening phrase Vincent had played in 1974. Clean. Professional. Exactly as written. But then Ace deviated. He took the melody somewhere Vincent hadn't gone. Somewhere the producer would never have approved. He bent notes that weren't supposed to bend. He added phrases that broke the clean structure. He played with emotion instead of precision, though the precision was still there, underneath, holding everything together. This wasn't showing off. This wasn't flash. This was Ace playing what he'd heard in his head 13 years ago, what he'd been told wasn't good enough for a record. It was raw. Imperfect in all the right ways. Human. The crowd didn't know the technical differences. They didn't understand music theory. They just knew they were hearing something real. Something that couldn't be faked or produced or polished in a studio. Halfway through the solo, something changed in the venue. The energy shifted. People weren't just listening anymore. They were leaning forward. Some were crying. Others had their hands over their mouths. Because this wasn't just guitar playing. This was a conversation. A 13-year-old response to a 13-year-old dismissal. An answer that didn't require words. Ace finished the solo with a sustained note, letting it ring out across the arena, letting it fade naturally instead of cutting it off. When the last vibration died, there was a beat of absolute silence. Then Madison Square Garden erupted. Not polite applause. Not the usual concert energy. Something different. 15,000 people on their feet, screaming, crying, pounding their hands together so hard it hurt. Ace looked back at Vincent Torres in section 117. Vincent was clapping too. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of applause that means more than noise. And then Vincent did something unexpected. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted across the arena, his voice barely carrying over the crowd noise but clear enough for Ace to hear. "That's the one that should have been on the record!" What followed silenced everyone in the room. Ace set his guitar on its stand. Walked to the edge of the stage. Gestured to security, pointing at section 117. "Bring him up," Ace said into the mic. The crowd's roar intensified. Security moved through the rows, gently guiding Vincent toward the stage. The older man looked terrified, shaking his head, trying to refuse, but the crowd was pushing him forward with encouragement, with cheers, with that collective human need to see something beautiful happen. When Vincent reached the stage, a roadie helped him up. He stood there in his worn denim jacket, looking completely out of place under the bright lights, surrounded by equipment and spectacle, face to face with Ace Frehley for the first time in 13 years. Ace extended his hand. Vincent took it. They shook. Simple. Quiet. While 15,000 people lost their minds around them. Ace leaned close, speaking directly into Vincent's ears so he could be heard over the noise. The microphones didn't catch it. The cameras couldn't capture it. But those who were close enough, roadies, band members standing in the wings, they heard it. "You played it right," Ace said. "Exactly as written. Professional. That's what they needed. But thank you for being here tonight. For letting me play what I should have played then." Vincent's eyes were wet. He nodded, unable to speak. Ace picked up his guitar again. Handed Vincent a second guitar, a spare Gibson that had been sitting on a stand nearby. "You remember the chords?" Ace asked. Vincent looked at the guitar in his hands like it was a foreign object. "I haven't played in 8 years. Doesn't matter. Just play with me." And right there, on the Madison Square Garden stage, in front of 15,000 people, 2 guitarists, one legendary, one forgotten, played together. It wasn't complicated. Just a simple 12-bar blues progression. Vincent's fingers were stiff at first, hesitant. But muscle memory returned. His hands found the shapes. The notes came. Ace played rhythm. Let Vincent take the lead. Gave him the spotlight that had been taken away 13 years ago. They played for 2 minutes. Maybe 3. It felt longer. It felt like time expanding, like a moment being given the weight it deserved. When they finished, Ace took the guitar back. Shook Vincent's hand again. Nodded. Vincent walked off stage. Security guided him back to his seat. The show continued. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. After the concert, Ace found Vincent in the lobby. Gave him a backstage pass for every show in the tour. Vincent came to 3 more. Never spoke much. Just watched from the wings, nodding occasionally when Ace played something particularly well. The last time they saw each other, Vincent handed Ace a cassette tape. A recording from the 1974 session. The original solo Ace had played before he walked out. The one that never made it to the record. Thought you should have it, Vincent said. Ace never listened to it. But he kept it. In his guitar case. A reminder that being right isn't the same as being heard, and being heard isn't the same as being understood. Sometimes you just play. And if you're lucky, someone listens.